Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly update for January 21st, 2021. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com. Before we get rolling on our whistleblower stories for this week, it's my pleasure to bring Brian in and say hello to him and have him share a few things with you.
Hi, Kevin. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us again today. Just your usual reminder to make sure that you have clicked the subscribe or the follow button wherever you're watching this right now so you can keep up to date, not just on these shows that we have every week and the streams that Kevin has been doing regularly, which are fantastic, but also the reporting that we publish at shadowproof.com. So please make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to support it, we're 100% funded by our readers. You can go to shadowproof.com/donate. We have lots of options for donations and monthly memberships, and you can also subscribe to Kevin's wonderful newsletter, which is dissenter.substack.com, which I'm sure we will talk about a little bit later in the show. All great ways to support our work and keep us publishing. So thank you all for tuning in. Without further ado, let's jump right in here. We have our first story, which is a whistleblower in California files a complaint over double standard for homeless taser joke. Sounds terrible. What's the story here, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm going to read the anonymous official complaint that was submitted. This comes from the Sarasota Police Department in California. But for our global audience, it's just a California Police Department. That's really all you need to know. This officer said, "I would like to make an anonymous official complaint reference to inappropriate and insensitive statements made by the chief of police that occurred on or about November 18th, 2020 at the Sarasota Police Department. I fear by allowing my name to be in the complaint, I would be retaliated against by my supervisor and or my division commander if they were to find out I had discussed the situation. This incident, although brief, has weighed on my mind heavily for some time, and I feel it must be addressed and brought to light. During an event held at 2099 Adams Lane, where the Sarasota Opera was providing free entertainment to the employees of the police department, a local mentally handicapped individual rode up on his three-wheel bicycle." These are my words, by the way. I'm not necessarily how I would describe this person. "This subject is well known to the Sarasota community and has been in the area for a long time. While the performers were singing, this subject began mimicking the singers while standing on the side of the roadway, eating a baked chicken and being loud. He continued to be mildly disruptive, not terribly, but enough that those in attendance would notice his presence. When the performance was over and the farewells were said to the performers, the troupe of Sarasota Police Department employees walked into the building together near each other. While walking into the building and in front of at least a half dozen officers, the chief of police asked the group if she could borrow someone's taser, motioning to the mentally handicapped individual, clearly indicating this would be used on the subject due to his interruption of the event. This was an inappropriate, demeaning, and degrading comment from the city's top officer, regardless of if it was a joke or not. This behavior and comment from the chief of police was not acceptable. She has disciplined officers for verbal discourtesy for far more minor offensive or insensitive remarks to citizens. Very inappropriate for a leader to make light of such an individual publicly in front of officers, no less joke about a use of force against them for no reason." It goes on to say this type of comment would be met with harsh punishment. If a patrol officer had said this about the same individual who, we're suggesting has some kind of mental illness, many officers have found her statements insensitive and out of line, but will not come forward due to fear of retaliation from the chief or her staff. I mean, it's also possible they could have a development disability, whoever this individual is. So this person is essentially calling out what we all know to be basically true in a lot of our institutions, that there's this double standard of who gets prosecuted. It's the low-level employees or the staff members who get punished, who are told to follow the rules and regulations, and people at the top can get away with acting as they please. The name of the chief is Chief Bernadette DePino. She was ordered to take compliance and ethics training, which is equivalent of, basically being scolded and told not to do that again. and so there are still calls for her to be fired and no longer lead the police department, simply because, if we're going to believe that there are rules that are to be followed, there ought to be consequences.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing that story with us. Our next story, we turn to Chicago, where a police lieutenant has blown the whistle on quotas for traffic stops and faces retaliation. What is this story?
So Franklin Paz, and this is coming from WTTW, which is a local news outlet in the city where I'm based. Franklin Paz is a lieutenant who has been with the Chicago Police Department for 20 years. He alleges that he was demoted and retaliated against for refusing to engage in what he describes as unlawful quota-based police activity. He was assigned to something called a community safety team. This happened after violence was reportedly surging in 2020. He says he was instructed by Deputy Chief Michael Bars to increase the number of, quote, traffic stops, arrests, citations, and other police contacts. And then from the article, I'll just read this excerpt. Specifically, Bars, that's B-A-R-Z, wanted to see more blue cards, which, according to the complaint, are documents created by officers who detain a person but don't formally arrest them or issue them a traffic citation. Paz alleged that Bars soon required officers to hit daily quotas and started criticizing him and his officers over low numbers of blue cards. And in one conversation from the complaint, Bars allegedly singled out a sergeant who reported to Paz and said the person was going to be removed from their assignment if they didn't produce more police activity. When Paz tried to defend the sergeant by explaining that in the past they had focused on community policing efforts and quality of life issues in their areas, which do not result in the data that Bars wanted, Bars' response was to say, "Fuck community policing, I need activity." After he told Bars, and this is Paz, so after this lieutenant told Bars that this type of conduct was why the Chicago Police Department remains under a federal consent decree, which, by the way, is true, he was removed and given a midnight shift that involved patrol duty. And he's gone through a period of extreme stress, which as a result of the retaliation, and he's since been hospitalized. So this is the latest example of someone in a police department in Chicago facing this retaliation as a whistleblower. There are a number of examples in recent history. We've talked about them on the show. And obviously this person is known. So this is a different kind of a whistleblower story than the one related to the homeless taser joke. If we go back to the homeless taser joke, because that person has anonymity, this person is known to superior officers, did make the complaint with their name attached to this is what happened. And we don't say this to degrade this kind of action. Obviously, I encourage people to come forward. But again, people are martyring themselves constantly in our police departments, believing that they're going to be able to do this and change the institutional culture. And it's just not enough for them alone to speak up. It's very easy for them to be sacrificed.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'll point out too, it's interesting, the person, the ethics training sort of retaliation or response. I always tend to think that sort of thing is more about those of us watching from the outside than the actual people who are supposed to go through the training. It's more of like a PR move than anything else.
I mean, what's the ethics training going to be now during COVID? I mean, you log on a Zoom and eat donuts and drink orange juice and coffee with some officers for like an hour and then you're done? Or like, how does a chief even, like, where would a chief even go for ethics training? Like, it just doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, is there a place that chiefs are going to go to get training on ethics?
It's probably a video series of some sort. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, on a certain level, attending 1 or 2 or 3 classes isn't really going to change anyone's behavior. You have to change the incentives. You have to provide consequences. All of this other stuff is more about just placating those of you on the outside who would be upset at at them doing nothing. So anyway, let's go on to our next story here in Florida. We have Florida tries to deny charged COVID-19 data whistleblower access to the internet. This has been an interesting story. I'm glad that you brought this on here. What do you have to tell us about this?
It's received a lot of attention, and people have followed Rebekah Jones, the COVID-19 data whistleblower, because she is outspoken. She has hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, and she is someone who's been highly critical of the Florida state government because of what she alleges happened to her in retaliation, how she was forced out, and the way in which they continue to conceal what's going on with COVID-19 or act negligently and not take the virus seriously in the state. And she was raided, of course. And then in the past week, we saw she was charged with a misuse of a state computer and jailed. She's out on bond. She apparently tested positive for COVID. It's unclear if that happened from her being in jail or if she came into contact with other people in the process. We just simply don't know. But this just seems emblematic of the negligence that has been a hallmark of her whistleblowing, as what she's exposed is ongoing in Florida, as they don't seem to take the death toll seriously in the state. And as she accuses them of doing, they fudge the numbers. So more significantly, I wanted to focus on local news reporting that says the state initially tried to prohibit her from computer and internet access, but the court that heard her request for bond said she could retain access to cell phones, computers, and the internet, but she was ordered not to access any state computer systems. Well, that makes sense because she's no longer an employee and she wouldn't have that access, or shouldn't anymore. I would think that they would have removed her from any logins, or she's not to have any contact with people whose information was downloaded. So, well, that's also common sense. She's not going to contact any whistleblowers who had passed on information to her because they could be in jeopardy right now since there's an investigation, and anything she talks to them about is going to be a subject of this criminal prosecution. The main point I want to make here, and I didn't intend to spend a lot of time on this, is to say that I see evidence that this case is a political case. She is being charged with a political offense to silence her, and this thing of wanting to keep her off of her computer and away from internet access, even though she's going to watch what she says because she's facing a prosecution, it just is a signal to me that this isn't a straight up case of someone committing a crime. They definitely are trying to single her out and silence her.
Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I'm a little slow on my mouse clicks today. Let's turn to our next story here. We have ExxonMobil is accused by a whistleblower of exaggerating the value of top U.S. oil field. What is this story?
So in the Wall Street Journal, we have a report on a whistleblower complaint that accuses this multinational, really mega corporation that has dominated the fossil fuel industry for decades of exaggerating the value of this oil field in the Permian Basin. It's one of the top areas of production in the United States. And the complaint claimed that workers were directed to use unrealistic estimates for how fast the company could drill wells. At least one worker is known to have been fired, one worker who was involved in submitting the whistleblower complaint. This is with the Securities Exchange Commission. So why do I think this is worth talking about on our show? Last year, I covered a report that was put out by the National Whistleblower Center, which warned that the fossil fuel industry has a, quote, long history of fraud and deception, from systematic underpayment of oil and gas royalties to schemes by mining companies to defeat benefit claims from miners with black lung disease. And it went on to point out that a 2016 survey of the oil and gas sector and mining sector, that includes coal, there was a firm that found, a consulting firm did a survey and found 35% of respondents would act unethically to help a business survive an economic downturn. Well, what are we in right now for the fossil fuel industry? As people remain under lockdown conditions and as we've seen much less consumption of fossil fuels. The survey also concluded that increased pressure on managers would provide a strong incentive to do whatever it takes to make the numbers look good. That's exactly what we're seeing alleged in this whistleblower complaint. And I think we should be on the lookout for these kinds of complaints from whistleblowers, because the fossil fuel industry is in very dire straits, and I'm not suggesting we should bail it out or rescue it. And I'm obviously of the mind that we need to move away from fossil fuels simply because of how they destroy the environment. But it also has been a part of our economy, a critical part of our economy. There are lots of jobs, and whatever sort of I suppose, turmoil or issues they go through as they make these fraudulent claims, those are going to have ripple effects, repercussions for us all. So we should be monitoring it closely and be aware that the health of their companies, they're going to conceal it so that they can pretend like their shareholders don't have anything to panic over. And I think this whistleblower complaint is an example of this kind of fraud that the National Whistleblower Center was warning us about and telling us to look for in the not so distant future.
Well put. Appreciate that. We have a couple more stories here. Our next one is the head of U.S. state media agency resigns months after hiring a firm to create dossiers on purged employees. Walk us through this one.
This individual is Michael Pack. He's a conservative filmmaker who was brought in to run the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And this is a U.S. state government media organization. And, we like to single out state media in China, single out state media in Russia. We have our own state media institutions. And I think in order to uphold the kinds of principles and values I have of believing that there can be good people who work in state-funded media country to country, because we've seen such a decimation of the media industry globally, and especially, we follow closely what's happening in the United States. There are people who are probably good individuals who have taken up jobs at Voice of America, believe they could be journalists, and they're supposed to be a kind of firewall where they're able to produce the kind of reporting we would see at the Associated Press or Reuters, put out, newswire type coverage of politics and news events. And yet when Michael Pack took over, that was part of a transformation of making this into a media organization that could serve former President Donald Trump. And we're finding out all kinds of allegations of corruption related to Pack, who Biden essentially forced to resign right when he took office on January 20th. And this complaint, or this letter to members of Congress from the Government Accountability Project, says that they represent several whistleblowers that have information about payments over the past 3 months of at least $2 million to a large law firm called McGuire Woods to investigate current and former employees of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, the parent agency of Voice of America, and to perform follow-up audit compliance, among other matters. Now, that sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but the part that I really find glaring and important to highlight in this show is the fact that there are apparently dossiers that were compiled about these purged employees. So it says that on August 12, 2020, Mr. Pack removed 6 longtime senior officials at this U.S. Agency for Global Media. They were career civil servants. It was described as a purge. These people, I believe, were involved in a whistleblower complaint, and they're represented by the Government Accountability Project. And it's now clear that the firm was hired to justify the purge, according to GAAP. McGuire Woods has devoted at least hundreds of hours to creating dossiers on each purged employee. The dossiers were then used as the basis to commence administrative removal proceedings to permanently remove each one from federal service. We believe McGuire Woods has compiled dossiers on additional current and former employees of USAGM, Voice of America, and other sibling agencies. And we know that this was likely what was going on because Pack was complaining about finding people who were Democrats or loyal to Joe Biden, or weren't effectively loyal to Donald Trump, who might betray Donald Trump, who might have more interests with serving what he described as the deep state, something that was a trend during President Donald Trump's administration, as a way to weed out people who he didn't think were towing the line that he wanted to be towed. And so this is a clear evidence of a political transformation of the agency. And of course, last week we highlighted how the end of Donald Trump's presidency involved Mike Pompeo at the as Secretary of State being invited into Voice of America's building to give a major propaganda speech to cap off his time as Secretary of State, which was further evidence, because media were denied the ability to attend and report on it and ask him questions. It was further evidence of how this was being used as a political tool by the Trump administration.
Thank you, Kevin. Our last story here, we're going to turn to our regular Assange segment here, including Edward Snowden. You wrote a little bit about this. There was a lot of speculation as to whether Trump would offer clemency of some sort to Snowden or Assange in the final moments of his presidency, and he did not. What can you tell us about this here?
Yeah, so I am one who does not believe it was inappropriate for supporters of Assange or Snowden to think that Donald Trump would potentially pardon. It's clear that their campaigns had some impact because they were able to reach him. They were having supporters go on Fox News primetime shows in order to communicate directly with him. There was a handful of Republican representatives in Congress who were making the case to him on a partisan basis of why he should stick it to Democratic allies in the security establishment and pardon Assange and Snowden. But what happened is there were apparently threats, if not outright political pressure, levied against him by Mitch McConnell and others who likely have influential positions in the Senate. These were Republicans. And he was told if he wanted to have any hope of avoiding conviction during a Senate trial after his second impeachment, he needed to abandon any thought of issuing pardons for Edward Snowden or WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And so ultimately, this is what unfolded. And the other wrinkle to the way pardons were doled out is that our good friend John Kiriakou, CIA whistleblower, was part of some national news related to Trump abusing his pardon authority, where it was revealed that there was a conversation that took place where an associate of Rudy Giuliani informed. It's a little unclear in the report. I think it was John Kiriakou himself. It could have been somebody who was affiliated with John or representing John's interests, but essentially, John Kiriakou was informed in some way that he'd have to come up with $2 million if he wanted a pardon, to which John Kiriakou told the press that was laughable. What he wants a pardon for is to restore his $700,000 pension. I think that's what he was valuing it at. And so you're not going to spend $2 million just to get access to this pension that's not even that much. And so he found obviously this to be obscene and rejected any kind of offer to provide a payment to win a pardon from Donald Trump. But this was evidence of the corruption of the pardon process. And John himself has advocated for moving this pardon authority out of the Justice Department entirely. And okay, all right, thank you. I'm seeing that somebody following our conversation is informing me that John Kiriakou was the one who actually had this conversation with a Giuliani associate. So yeah, so he had a front row seat to this pardon corruption, where we saw all kinds of reports suggesting that these rich people, these wealthy criminals and felons, ex-felons around the country that had millions of dollars were these white collar criminals were just opening their pockets, offering any sums they could to Donald Trump with the hope of making this list of 100 plus people that was published at like 3 or 4 a.m. It was really early or late in the night, just like 8 or 10 hours before his presidency was going to be over at noon. And this list would be was released, and then obviously Assange and Snowden were not on the list, and we knew that this was a representation of Donald Trump backing down, as was reported by the news media, because Republicans pressured him. But I also think it's emblematic of the way in which Donald Trump constantly bashed the so-called deep state throughout his presidency, yet did next to nothing in order to stand up to their institutional authority. And whether we're talking about military deployments or whether we're talking about surveillance powers that were abused, he never did anything to constrain their authority. He never did anything to alter their agenda meaningfully. And simply put, he was misdirected whenever they tried to misdirect him. And he just didn't have any interest in challenging them because it was hard work. And he didn't want to go through that struggle. And so almost everything he ever did during his presidency was about boosting his brand and what he could do for himself and people immediately in his circle who were also there to serve him, Donald Trump. And when it came to these pledges to stand up to the swamp, to drain the swamp, to go after any of these people who were involved in the Russiagate investigation, or to go after people who were abusing the national security state powers that they have at their fingertips, he just wasn't someone who had the stomach for it. And so he cowered. In the end, he cowered and submitted to the political establishment and left on an airplane to Mar-a-Lago, never to fulfill this pledge of actually taking on the very power and the very institutional centers of power that he had claimed he was going to confront during his first campaign back in 2016.
Thank you, Kevin. Any final thoughts today? Any last things you want to talk about? Anything you're working on, coming up, looking ahead to? Otherwise, of course, please tell folks about your wonderful newsletter that we've got here.
Yeah, thanks for putting that up there. I should mention that we did officially have an appeal filed by the U.S. government in Julian Assange's case. There's not a whole lot to say because I personally have not seen what those contents will be. I don't know if they're trying to buy some time since there's been a political transition and let the new group in the Biden Justice Department that will own this case. I don't know if they're letting them figure out what their arguments are going to be for why Julian Assange should still be extradited. Again, just to refresh everyone's memory, it's a very narrow sort of a case that they'll have to make because the appeal will revolve around saying the district judge was incorrect to believe Julian Assange would take his life in a U.S. prison. But I do want to take this moment to say that we should, a phrase that comes to my mind from Howard Zinn about the optimism of uncertainty, we should take advantage of this moment. It's in, we talk about Julian Assange being in legal limbo. The Justice Department is in a kind of limbo right now when it comes to the Assange case. And that's the moment where I think people will have the ability to make the most impact. So drop the charges campaigns, as I know Assange is going to be mounting, but also, Snowden could have his own drop the charges campaign. This is the time for that. I think it's probably a lot harder for Snowden because it was the Obama administration that indicted him. But the Obama administration did not indict Julian Assange. That remains a fact that we should wield in a way that could help bring this case to an end. And until they own it, until someone from the Justice Department who works for the Biden administration says why they are going to continue with this case, I think there is an opening to force them to make a different decision, to take a different course than Donald Trump's Justice Department, because they aren't going to be the people running it aren't going to be like Jeff Sessions. It's not going to be people like Bill Barr. They're different, and maybe they come to the same conclusions about certain policies and certain courses of action, but I just don't think they are as vengeful about people. I mean, I'm hemming and hawing here because I can see someone immediately coming up with counter examples. But to me, I think that there is a difference in the way that they have approached. Democrats have taken a different tactic when it comes to Assange than Republicans. It's been Republicans who have talked openly of wanting to drone bomb Julian Assange, and like extrajudicially assassinate him outside the law. And I know someone's going to say, well, Barack Obama gave Donald Trump this drone program that he could inherit, and there was extrajudicial assassinations and stuff. But, I'm suggesting that the zeal for going after Assange just isn't there in the Obama administration. And what they know is going to be the end result of a successful conviction of what it would mean for them as far as their reputation around the world. I wonder what they're thinking as far as how it would undermine some soft power that the U.S. government has to claim that they care about not jailing journalists, or that they do not that they care about standing up for press freedom. Because certainly China is going to look at a trial against Julian Assange as a way of singling out the United States, and I believe they already have. So I think that they, yes, while Biden and Obama are not the same people, I don't see that much of a difference when it comes to, well, first off, just to be clear, Biden and Obama are not the ones who are making the decisions. These were all institutional Justice Department decisions. I actually don't believe that Obama was ever involved in the decision making around Assange. That was all. It maybe Eric Holder was brought into it, or some other career prosecutors, but it's going to come down to what people are thinking internally at the Justice Department, and I don't know. I sound indecisive because I don't actually feel like I know. I can be that cynical person. I could say what I think is likely to happen, but then I think if I'm that way, I'm discouraging people from speaking up at a moment when we could probably have the most impact. If you believe in taking the stand for press freedom, I think it's a unique moment, because what I'm saying is what we know about the any presidential administration is when they take a position, they now politically own it. And so before someone in the Biden administration says, we are going to pursue Julian Assange and bring him to justice, this is the time to act to make them veer off of that course.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, just to sort of reiterate, I think your argument, I also think that, to bring it back to what you were initially saying, the uncertainty is the opportunity for intervention. We can sit here, we can look at the officials, we can plot out probably what's likely to happen, but it's also true that this is sort of an interesting moment. We're in the very opening days of a new presidency where a lot of promises have been made. There's a huge sort of contradictions or juxtapositions that the Biden administration is going to try to draw between itself and Donald Trump. And I think that if anything, if we set aside what we think is going to happen or what's not going to happen, if we talk about this from a movement perspective in terms of our opportunities, this seems like a ripe moment to make a very forceful demand. And I would say not even, and I guess to your point, again, not just for Assange and not just for Snowden, we shouldn't probably isolate them into separate cases. In fact, I think that it's probably in all of our best interest to find the connections and forcefully tie together the whistleblowers of the last decade plus as a common cause and as a common interest in terms of press freedom, in terms of government transparency and government accountability. If Biden is really coasting into office and has all of this political capital to spend on these issues of order and legitimacy of the institutions and sort of a new day in America or whatever sort of resurrected Ronald Reaganism that they've created today. I think this is the time to do it before and to make him stake out a position that he's then going to have to defend or work with going forward. There are a lot of different groups and issues vying for his attention right now. Obviously, there are a lot of major things going on, but it's up to those of you out there, people who believe, again, not just in these isolated cases, but in the overall cause of whistleblowing and press freedom and transparency in government, to unite these cases and demand that the Biden administration treat them as related in terms of how they've been approached.
Yeah, I think that you've got it right here, because what's going to be most effective is if there's some kind of a comprehensive activist campaign to bring attention to the last decade of policy. And so I think that it should be several individuals that are part of these calls for, essentially, we're talking about clemency or discretion on the part of prosecutors, because whether or not you could look at the legal code very closely and come up with a case, we're saying leave these people alone.
Yeah.
Don't go after them.
A prosecutor can make a case out of, they can indict a ham sandwich,
Exactly. The grand jury motto. Yeah.
Right.
So there's Reality Winner, who should be let out right now, who we're hearing in the last week was put, as happened at all federal facilities, under a lockdown because there were fears of more insurrectionary activity against Trump. So they put all these prisoners under a lockdown. So I guess compounding the restrictions already there because of COVID-19. There's still there's still virus spreading, and people there are now talking about, prisoners, are talking about getting the virus for a second and third time. It's dreadful. So I don't think she's the only prisoner who should be released, but clemency for Reality. We have a case that'll likely be brought against Daniel Hale, a drone whistleblower. Let's not go to trial. Let's abandon that.
Drop the charges.
Give people like John Kiriakou, maybe even Tom Drake should be brought into this. There are others from the last decade. Chelsea already got a commutation, so I think she's mostly been able to be made whole again. But maybe there's something that can be done.
Yeah.
But maybe she can get a flat out pardon. Right. That'd be fine. Maybe there could be some kind of overture made to her about how she shouldn't have been made to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars after being dragged before a grand jury. There's definitely something that the administration could do for her for the abuse that she suffered under Trump. You have all of these Espionage Act cases. There was Terry Albury under Donald Trump, who's an FBI whistleblower who called attention to racial profiling by, I believe it was FBI agents. And so these people deserve to have their lives made whole. They deserve pardons. They deserve some kind of action by the Biden Justice Department. And then we need to see something done with the Espionage Act in Congress. We need to see either a massive abolition of the act to move away from it, but then we know there's going to be a vacuum, and we are concerned about what would be the law that fills that vacuum. Then we need to have all of these organizations that are civil liberties organizations or press freedom groups come together and decide what sort of trade-off they're willing to make here. They're going to have to give the government some kind of authority to punish, but what are they going to how are we going to move the line? Because right now it's too far in the direction of punishing dissenters. But how are you going to allow the government the authority to control their classified information and maintain authority over their secrets? Because they're going to do something. And you're going to need to offer up, I'm going to use a dreadful word here, compromise, but you're going to have to, you're not going to get them to just allow the release of documents whenever to media outlets, but we need to come up with something that protects freedom of speech, freedom of expression, allows for the flow of information, but also says that, like, okay, we recognize that you're going to be imposing penalties, at least administratively, on these individuals if they make this choice to violate a security clearance and share this information. I think we can go back to the way it mostly worked in the 1990s and 2000s, where it was just seen as a professional dilemma where you could be slapped on the wrist, you could have a demotion, you could see your pay docked, your employment you wouldn't lose your job, but you might be suspended for a short period of time. It just wasn't treated as a seditious or treasonous act. And that's where we need to get away from, is it's not treason, I believe, for you to do this. And that's what we need. We can't have a law called the Espionage Act that's targeting leakers and whistleblowers when they're not committing espionage. They're not to inform us as the public is not a crime against our country. And so that's what we need. We need to change this. Culturally, we need these education campaigns to move people away from viewing this. And, I'm concerned as I look towards, there's a week that people in journalism constantly mark called Sunshine Week in March, where they look at Freedom of Information Act requests. I dread what we're going to learn about what the Trump administration did to FOIA in the last 4 years. The backlog has to be a kind of disaster that is, as far as FOIA goes, is on par.
It was already bad.
It was already bad, but it has to be. I have to imagine that whoever is in charge has the same face as someone who walked in and realized there's no vaccine rollout plan in existence in the Trump administration. And you're just looking at the FOIA backlog and you're just, oh my, like, this is going to take just 5 years to get through the backlog, let alone keep on top of new requests for information. So yeah, I think we need something that people can do to holistically tackle this matter. And we don't have a policy. We don't know what Biden is going to do on any of this. This is the chance.
The opportunity.
This is the chance to make an issue out of. I mean, it's very different than to take something that people know. It's very different than Medicare for all, because we know Biden's already staked out a position as an opponent. And so there's no fantasy land. We can't act like, maybe we could move him to support it. No, he's flat out said he opposes giving Medicare to all Americans, which means that if we want it, we have to organize in an adversarial way against Joe Biden in order to make him do the thing that makes sense. But on this, we know that there's institutional opposition. We know that security agencies are going to frustrate us and thwart us when it comes to this, in the same way that they got in the way of pardons for Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. But what we don't know is what the political establishment, the staff members of Biden are going to advise him to do. And whether they're going, he's actually been involved in things like the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act that was passed in 2012. He's been there in the Senate for the Whistleblower Protection Act that was passed 25 plus years ago. He was involved in Dodd-Frank, which gave whistleblowing protection to financial whistleblowers. And if you don't think that's meaningful, I have to discourage that kind of attitude, simply because we do have a ton of Republicans and even some centrist Democrats who protect Wall Street interests and don't want whistleblowers to have any power. And we do have people who get concerned about granting too much authority to too much protection to whistleblowers because they are serving corporations and they're serving the military industrial complex or the national security state. So this is just a starting point. These are things that give you the daring sensibility that you could at least try to maybe achieve something that could help people. And I know we've been going for a while. This is sort of an overtime portion where we have a conversation together, and I like where this went. There's one thing
I wanted to just say one more thing in terms of the urgency and the moment of opportunity that we're in, which is that on the flip side of this coin, we did obviously just have the white riot on the Capitol. There is a lot of conversation around sedition, around patriotism, around being, who's a traitor and what is a traitor, and so on and so forth. There's talk of new terrorism legislation in the federal government. Another reason why it's important to be forceful about these particular demands right now is to ensure that this is not lumped in to whatever is going to happen there. Now, I personally believe that we don't need any new terrorism legislation in this country. We are perfectly capable, as is obvious, of prosecuting whoever we want, whenever we want, with the laws that we have on the books right now. The real fear, I think, in addition to that, is this opportunity that Biden might see to be like, oh, well, I can do a little bit of a bipartisan both sides. Like, I'll trade you the Antifa for the QAnon people, like that kind of logic. And I think that that's another utility of a campaign such as this, is to sort of be the backstop to prevent that sort of thing from happening, because I could see it happening, and I think it would be sort of a huge step in the wrong direction. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. So one thing I want to say to you, and since I have you, I get your response to my statement here. Just a comment on Biden being inaugurated. So I was someone who's really hypercritical of the fact that Donald Trump was just running roughshod over environmental regulations and all kinds of things that we had taken for granted that were in place to protect us from pollution. And I'm seeing that they're going to do a massive review of these environmental regulations, which need to happen. We are seeing some things done through executive action that I think are crucially important. But the one thing I want to make clear to everybody here is that I think we have to be able to have a kind of balance here. And the reason why I'm going to plead for people to allow this balance is because it's the only way I can do my coverage and discussions of these issues with accuracy. So it's not about personality. I just want to lay a marker here. Anything that I say going forward over the next 4 years, it's not about the personality of Joe Biden. If I say that I approve of a policy, it's because that policy choice or decision is something that I think is beneficial to people. And I see those groups, marginalized or not, responding favorably to them. The people who were under immense pressure over the last 4 years, who may respond happily to a moratorium for 100 days on deportations, knowing that they have a little bit of relief and have an opening to push for more change. I have to acknowledge that that's something that we can put in the positive column. The fact that the Keystone XL pipeline that permit is being rescinded, when we saw Donald Trump so zealously try to return us to a future of fossil fuel consumption at a time when we're trying to move away from that. And now there's an opening to get rid of the Dakota Access Pipeline permit. There's an opening to get rid of the Line 3 pipeline permit out in Minnesota. I believe it's a tar sands pipeline that goes to Alberta, Canada. This is tremendous, with people we know who are in the White House who, if they're going to take this action, now have to defend not taking this action further, this additional action. Like, now the politics is, if you're going to do this, why don't you also do that? And so where I'm leading is, I'm going to be consistently calling out all the negatives. I mean, stay tuned if you are able to subscribe to the Unauthorized Disclosure Show. Rania Kalik and me are going to go through Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State nominee, and just how horrible he is as far as U.S. foreign policy, saying the administration is going to support Juan Guaido fully, even though he's completely failed as the coup regime leader. He hasn't even been able to take power in Venezuela over the last 2 years, which should be like the first prerequisite for having any support from the United States. I just don't even understand practically, if you support this as a policy, how you can support someone who can't even win power in Venezuela. But that's my example of, I'm not going to back down. And Lloyd Austin, who's going to become the Pentagon secretary, is a lobbyist and someone who's a contractor from Raytheon. So I'm going to be highly critical of him and what he does. And along the way, I'm going to be highly critical of this idea that we need to have unity in order to make any kind of change. It's first off, I think, politically speaking, if I'm just putting on my pundit hat here, that doesn't make any sense, because right now, if you even watch just a few minutes of the establishment media, which, I understand some of you might not want to watch that because you view it as poison, but if you happen to catch any clips of the mainstream media, you'll see that they're still pretty furious that there are Republicans who didn't want to certify Joe Biden as president. And they're still pretty, and some of them are baffled at the thought that people that wouldn't certify Biden as president are going to be good faith negotiators over policies with Democrats and Joe Biden's White House. That's the opportunity for people who are at the grassroots level to say, go get certain shit done right now without waiting to bring Republicans along. I think they're going to be nothing but bad faith negotiators, obviously, presuming that these are policies that I want to be adopted and that I think could have any chance of helping working people. But let's just take like $2,000 checks for people as the example. And if you're not going to get Republicans on board with that, if they don't want to give money, if they don't want more unemployment assistance, you can do it without Republicans. They have the votes. They have a mechanism for doing it through budget reconciliation. And now's the time to lean into the certain political climate that we're still sort of in, even though we've moved on to the Biden presidency, because people still live in utter disgust that there were Republicans who were fueling an insurrection against Joe Biden's election. And so that's what I say. I just let me sum it up here, and then you can respond to the essential thing that I'm trying to communicate. If it's a positive, I'm gonna probably single out how it's a step in the right direction, and then what more needs to be done to keep the struggle alive and keep pushing onward towards a goal. And we can debate whether it gets us on that path toward it. But if it's something like the Keystone XL permit has been rescinded, I can't not be pleased and happy that we're taking a step away. 10 years later, it took too long. We shouldn't have had to, struggle this long to get that out of our way. But it's something that's happening. I have to respond in a way that acknowledges that that is a step and is a tribute to the activists on the ground that have been fighting it, indigenous and beyond. Negatively, if something's happening, obviously I'm going to bash it and I'm going to speak out against it relentlessly. And that's what I think viewers and people who consume Shadowproof would expect of us.
Yeah. I agree. I don't have too much to add to that. I would say that as a general editorial rule, I guess, I've known Kevin for a very long time. We've worked at previous publications together and so on and so forth. We do not hitch our wagons to politicians. Politicians are a means to an end for us. We're not interested in following people through their careers or blah, 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 any of that nice stuff. We are aligned with movements and the goals of movements. On top of that, I would just say that I think you're right. I think we need to get to a point where we can appreciate the complexity. I think a lot of this stuff has to be, I think for a lot of this stuff, the problem arises when it comes to the frame. Like certain things can be seen as piecemeal and not enough and so on and so forth, but it depends on if you're articulating where you're going. Where are you trying to go? What's the end result? This is just a very basic question that's been missing from American politics, I think, for maybe 30 years now. We don't really talk very much in politics about the future anymore, which is kind of like a very sad thing. I think the Medicare for All fight, the climate change fight are two places where you really see the light shining through. But for the most part, I think that the sort of, especially, among liberals in Washington, D.C., have really internalized the end of history sort of nonsense, where we are just now sort of maintaining the way things are, and maybe we'll get new gadgets here and there, but this is as good as government gets. This is as good as society gets. And I think that we can and we need to appreciate the small things as long as we are articulating where we're going and the bigger picture and how it fits in and the struggle that remains. For me, the problem is always getting stuck, is when people get stuck in the like, okay, well, that's enough. Like I'm not asking anything else because I got this one little thing that I wanted. I don't think that's very smart. Politics or just life in general. So that's what I would add to that. But I agree with you completely.
And I know we need to wrap, but I'd just say we need to mine these contradictions, okay? And the Biden administration is filled with lip service toward radical politics. They're putting in busts of Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks in the Oval Office. And we see that the National Labor Relations Board general counsel was fired, which is extraordinary because often he would get to finish his term, but he was so hostile to unions, people that those in labor convinced Biden to immediately fire this man the first day that he was in office. And that's owed to the power of people who are involved in mobilizing on the ground around these issues. And issues, I emphasize issues. Everything that I talk about is going to be about my care and interest in particular issues. So I think that's good enough. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. There's maybe a post to write that sort of like lays out the ground rules for how you can understand my approach to the Biden administration. Obviously, during Trump, anytime I criticized Trump, people had to swoop in and remind me that Obama did it too. Like I didn't consistently cover what Obama was doing during his administration. But now it's going to be some detail about Donald Trump that I am going to be accused of forgetting as I criticize Joe Biden. So I want you to know that I have an entire body of work that goes back to 2008, and you can see that I've had my fair share of opportunities to trash both a Republican and Democratic president, and I didn't pull any punches. And neither has Brian. Both of us have spoken up. And then also we've engaged in local political struggles without pulling our punches against anyone, regardless of their political party. I was done with Lori Lightfoot here in Chicago the first day she walked into office, but she's a good example of the politics we have to stand up to. A Black lesbian woman who is forcing teachers back into the classroom at the same time that she keeps the city under lockdown conditions because she says that it's unsafe for people during a pandemic. And so I think we need to mine these contradictions. We need to look at the makeup of the Biden administration and see that they're making all of these overtures to progressives, but they're filtering it all through their own neoliberal agenda. So like they're trying to dress up their neoliberal agenda with this kind of radical politics that isn't genuine. And we need to call that out, and we need to expose its nature and say that either you're a fraud or either you're going to come all the way. Like rather than accepting that they're going to go a third of the way or a halfway there, we need to push them and agitate to go all the way, because that's the only thing that's sensible. If they're going to pay lip service to it, then we need to string them along and try to get them closer. And so we need to go and wrap up. But I'll say thank you for watching our broadcast here. If you want to subscribe to this newsletter, which we've had at the bottom of our screen for the last 20 minutes, dissenter.substack.com. This is where I put out reporting on whistleblower stories and publish any recent, I write about any recent developments with Julian Assange. And then to say thank you to everyone who's been following these streams. And through my experimentation, I believe for the most part going forward, on Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm going to do at least an hour of a live stream and hopefully have guests included in these. Brian's just going to be here on Thursdays, but on Monday and Wednesday, I'm going to invite people to come and have these kinds of conversations like the one we've been having here with Brian, but then also to cover stories, important reports that are going undercovered. And I'll start out with friends, people who I've done a lot of work with, people who I've given a platform to on my podcasts previously. And then I'll expand it out to new people who I have had a chance to speak with. So we've already posted video with Ray McGovern, and I interviewed him. And I got to talk to Andy Worthington last week. I think, next week on my list of people to talk to is Gareth Porter about what the Iran policy is going to be from the Biden administration. He's really good at covering that. So Mondays and Wednesdays at about 4 p.m. Eastern, so the same time as this, I'll be doing these chats, and then I'll bring you into the conversation. Some of our most loyal supporters. If you have questions or comments after I do the interview, I'll always check in. And along the way, while we're doing the interview, I'll let you get in some questions for our guests and make sure that our guests are talking about aspects of the issue at hand that you want to be addressed. So
I'd just add too that I love, it's been really great to watch since we've been doing this. Just, I don't know, have we been doing this for a full year yet? I'm not sure. I don't think so, but
the Dissenter Weekly.
Yeah.
It's more than a year now.
More than a year.
A year and a month.
What is time anyway?
What is time?
I was just gonna say I appreciate. It's been really wonderful to watch the sort of comments evolve over time. People now say hi to each other. They have conversations. I absolutely love it, and encourage you all to continue and keep asking questions in the YouTube comments and so on and so forth. And also wanted to express the appreciation for the folks who chipped in during the broadcast on YouTube. We see you and we love you and appreciate it very much. So thank you.
Yeah. So ask questions, share comments. The only thing I ask is if you don't like what I'm saying, try to do it in a way that isn't shitty. I just, if you're shitty, we're gonna ignore you, because it's neither of us are getting paid enough to tolerate this. So just try to be sensible. It's okay if you have a disagreement, and I'm willing to engage with people who have a different perspective. But if you just come in here being an asshole, we don't really have to tolerate your presence. It's just not required. And I'm not saying that anybody here is that way, but occasionally we'll get people who drop in and seem to have expectations for us that are unreasonable. And I've nuked a few people. But by and large, I love this. I really appreciate the engagement. It's the best part of my day. It's a great way to end my day on Monday and Wednesday, and then also today on Thursday when we do the weekly show. And I think this is a good place for us to wrap. So I don't know if you had anything else to add related to Shadowproof, but we've gone on long enough, and you can sign off.
Yeah, no, just like I said at the beginning, make sure you're following us wherever you're watching. If you want to support us, you can go here and sign up for Kevin's newsletter or shadowproof.com/donate. Otherwise, be safe out there, and we will see you next week. Take care.